Hello and welcome to the Progressions of Consciousness Internet Radio program. My name is Keith Henry. Thank you for joining me. This is going to be our first show. I hope you've had a chance to visit the website and look at our topic for discussion tonight. What we're going to be talking about is setting the stage for the Aquarian age. Setting the stage for the Aquarian age. You know, in many of my conversations with people that are waking up and starting to notice the energy that's coming into this age, a lot of people are asking, well, what's going to happen in the new age? And you hear a lot of people talking about the apocalypse and destruction, and you see what the New World Order is doing and all of these groups, and it can be a cause for concern. But I've come to bring a different message, and that is that we are the ones, collectively, as well as individually, that are going to be responsible for what happens in December 2012. And I hope you're not one of those that's buying into the gloom and doom that's forecasted by so many people, because I don't believe that's going to happen. I believe there are enough people waking up where we can avoid that. And I believe that there's new information coming into our consciousness, which is showing us how to go about these things. Radio programs like this, like the CLN network, they were unheard of many years ago. This is something new. This is a good sign. There are people that are hungry for knowledge. They want to know what to do. They want to understand what's going on in the world. But more than that, there's something underlying happening. There's some major awakening occurring. Let me introduce myself. My name is Keith Henry. This is the Progressions of Consciousness radio program. I want to talk just for a few minutes about who I am and where I came from. I've been involved with metaphysics probably since the late 1980s. I'm a former preacher, Pentecostal preacher at that. And all those years I was involved with the church, I had lots of questions that were never answered. But of course, you don't ask them too loudly. Of course, I did at some point, and they weren't received very well, and it kind of makes you stop asking, but it didn't make me stop questioning. Well, I also have a very, I'd say, an eclectic background. I've been a trainer for many, many years. Going on a good 25 years now, and that's adult education mostly. I've also been a writer for about 33 years, as well as an artist, and I've done all different kinds of writing, mostly creative writing, technical writing, you name it, I've pretty much done it. And I have a background in particle physics, and metaphysics has always fascinated me, but all of the sciences, actually. So this program is kind of a natural program for me, because it gives me a chance to talk about some of the things that I believe are vital for this period of time that we're in. And I believe that we have a window of time between now and approximately 2040, when the Aquarian age begins, to really ramp up our efforts and figure out how to become the transformers of our world, how to make it the way we want it to be. Because I believe that's what we're destined to do. We're destined to collectively come into the knowledge of how to create the world that we want to create. Therefore, we literally have the option of not worrying about all of the prognostications of destruction and doom and disaster, and we can focus our efforts on learning how to become creative, how to use our imaginations and our creative energies to bring about the kind of world that we want to see. Now, central to my program is going to be my website. The website is www.don'treadthisbook.net. That's don'treadthisbook.net. Now, on that site, you'll find a tremendous amount of reference material. I spent many, many hours putting together reference material for all the things I'll talk about on this show, or most of them, and if there's no reference material on the sites for the shows that you'll hear, on the radio website, or on that page, you'll find references for the shows in question. Once again, that website is www.don'treadthisbook.net. Now, the reason it's called that is because I wrote a book called Don't Read This Book If You're Right. And it essentially challenges people to really take a hard look at their critical thought process, because that's so important. You know, when we get into these kind of gray, spooky areas of spirituality and meditation and all these things, I think sometimes we leave the critical thought behind, and that element of critical thought is an extremely important element in our awakening. Because what you'll learn if you continue to listen to this program, what you'll learn is that our efforts to become spiritual, or to ascend, or to become connected with God or each other, are wasted efforts, because we're already spiritual, we're already connected to God. The only part of us that doesn't understand that is our perception. We've been conditioned to accept a set of concepts that really don't work. They didn't work for the people that gave them to us, and they don't work for us. But for the most part, as long as you have a group of people, and that could be, you know, a society or a culture or a planet of people, as long as you have this group of people that believe something and reaffirm it to each other, it doesn't have to be true, and it doesn't have to work. And that was really the thrust of my book, Don't Read This Book If You're Right, because it explores that whole area of how common it is for people to have really strong beliefs and belief systems that have nothing to back it up except that they believed it for their whole lives. It always amazes me how when someone will come on the scene in, you know, any venue of life, be it science, religion, society, culture, whatever it is, and they have these new ideals that they are convinced work because they work for them, or just because they have the intuition or a really heartfelt understanding that it'll work, that these kinds of thoughts and feelings are pretty much rejected, and the people that hear them reject them on the basis of the fact that they sound strange or that they sound different. Well, let me ask you a question. If there's new information that's coming forth, it's going to sound different, isn't it? It's going to sound strange. And this is where we've been so conditioned by fear to reject and to push away from information that sounds different than what we're used to hearing. But it's that very dynamic of getting involved with and accepting things that you're not used to hearing that have historically transformed the world in a substantive manner. I mean, look at Albert Einstein with his general theory of relativity. He was fought tooth and nail for 10 years on this theory, and the problem was he had to wait for a particular astronomical event to occur in order for his theories to be tested. And it ended up being about 10 years before they were able to do that. But once he was able to prove that his mathematics were correct and that his theories were correct, all of a sudden he was the hero. Everybody loved him. Theoretical physics was on the map, and Einstein was an Einstein was an instant overnight celebrity. So you basically have a whole world of front runners. You know, they jump on the bandwagon when it's proven to be right. And to a certain degree, you can't necessarily blame people, because the conditioning that we've been subject to for most of our lives is extremely potent and extremely effective. No one likes to hear new things. No one likes to hear things that are different than what they're used to hearing. Well, if that's you, let me just say very candidly that this is not the program you're going to be wanting to listen to, because we're going to be heading in that direction. So my first book, Don't Read This Book If You're Right, talks about the propensity of the human mind to fall victim to deception and propaganda and to lies. And, you know, more often than not, the things that we believe strongly, we have no proof of. And, you know, when you get into the area of religion and whatnot, people say, well, you don't need proof for religion. And that's one of the problems with the system, is because you don't need proof. So you just keep going in something that really doesn't work, except it gives you a certain sense of solace. It gives you a certain sense of devotion and connectedness to God. But it's really, you know, a terrible thing, because any connectedness that you need or desire, you already have. You just don't know it. And by following these religions or these ideologies, it's like the carrot on the stick. You're always reaching, trying to gain something that is already yours to claim. This book is also for people, especially for people that have been involved with different sects of religion for a very, very long time, and they're waking up and they're feeling a stir, and they're seeing and they're feeling in their hearts, due to that very connectedness that we spoke about, that the systems they've been involved with are really not healthy. They're really not working. By looking at the things that are going around within the system and within other systems, they're looking for answers. But there's always that fear of leaving, number one, that thing that you've been so familiar with, and number two, the prospect that, hey, am I going to go to hell? You know, am I disobeying God? So this book speaks specifically to that type of person. So for the most part, people listening to this program are probably not in that camp. But if you know anyone that is, this is probably a very good book to recommend to them. The other thing this book goes into detail about is the ideal of perception and what perception really is. You know, very few people would be willing to accept, without, you know, quite a bit of coercion, that their abilities to perceive things are limited to, you know, the quality and quantity of information that they've gathered over the years. To put it very simply, you cannot ever be sure that anything you perceive is reality. It's the nature of the human mind. It's the nature of humanity. There's no way to prove it. So it's not so much that you need to prove it. I mean, if you have a job, you're working 9 to 5, you don't need to prove that your car is there, as long as you can get in it and drive and go to work. So I'm not going to get ridiculous about this. What I'm trying to say is that the important things that are related to us as a race and our future are things that have been hidden from us because of the fact that it's very difficult to transcend programming and propaganda and to look at things clearly. Or rather, I'd rather say to look at things more accurately. Because what we have to begin to face is that any information that we have, any growth that we have, any enlightenment that we have, is never going to be absolute. They're just stages and increments of accuracy. And of course, the more accurate our outlook, the more of the energy behind that exalted outlook we can bring to bear in formulating or creating our circumstances, both currently and in the future. So if your paradigm is one of a God that would have you strap explosives to yourself and walk onto a bus and blow it up, then you're going to be very, very limited in what you can hear about the actuality of your existence and your future and the future of the human race. So perception is a two-edged sword. It's a double-edged sword. It is our tool for interfacing with reality, but at the same time it's very, very easily manipulated. I remember years ago, a person that I trusted very much said to me, believe half of what you hear and none of what you see. Now, for most of us, that's really a strange way of looking at things. If anything, you might think, well, believe half of what you see and none of what you hear. But the actual issue is what you see is nothing more than your interpretation of the facts. So your truth, what you believe based on what you perceive, is an interpretation. At best, it's an interpretation. And at worst, it's a deception. It's a programmed reality that you think belongs to you, but it came from some external source. And we're going to get very much into depth in the next several programs about what that source is, what that source of programming is, and how to defeat it. But let me just say very quickly before I go on that we really want to avoid looking at it in terms of defeating the program. What we want to do is displace the program. In other words, you don't want to throw anything away. All right, you don't want to say, well, this is trash, I'm going to throw it away. Then you've got this big vacuum. There's already enough stress and fear in a transition from a paradigm that you've held all your life that you believe is true into something that's really, frankly, strange. There's already enough pressure there than to say, well, I'm going to throw away my paradigm and start with something new. And I think even if you wanted to do that, you can't do that. So the key is to displace what is not working with something that is working. And the way you do that is you begin to feed your perception on the things that if you will, are more accurate, that will give you more empowerment toward the area that your heart is telling you to go. So these are the types of things that we really talk about in the first book, Don't Read This Book If You're Right. And on my website you'll see a lot of references, and don't think of me necessarily as a truther that's trying to overthrow the system, because attempting to overthrow the system is going to have the opposite effect. It's going to make the system stronger. And I also talk about that in the book and the reasons why it works that way. But what these references are there for is to help you to start really taking an in-your-face look at the things that you've believed, or probably, or many of you have believed for a very, very long time, that if you just apply critical thought, you'll see how really ridiculous it has been to believe these things. But you can't see it as long as your only point of reference is this programming that has been, that you've been barraged with since your youth, or since your earliest memories. Okay, now the second book is called The Invisible World and Other Obvious Things. And the whole idea of this book is it talks about the invisible origins of the visible world. And one of the primary purposes of this book, again, is to rearrange your thinking. Some of you may be aware that the thought process, although it is a chemical process and an electrical process, over a course of time it literally becomes a physical process. You've got these nerve tissue in your brain, and they're neurons, and when you think a certain way, you actually send electrical signals along a certain circuit, literally a circuit that's made of these neurons in your brain. And when you do that continually, the neurons actually physically change to accept those forms of thought, those various thought processes. So when you think a certain way over and over and over again, you're literally creating pathways in your brain, physiological pathways, that make thinking that way easier and easier each time you do it. Now, in the teaching of religion and teaching of faith, many people don't understand that, as you continue along in your faith or your religion or your cult or your ideology, whatever it is, whether it's good, bad, accurate, inaccurate, no matter what it is, the reason it appears or seems that your faith is getting stronger and that it's easier to believe these things and that you believe it more and more and that you progressively believe these things is because of these physical pathways that your brain is creating based on a repetition of that information. So strong faith, if you want to look at it that way, is nothing more than the product of repetition over a long period of time. I hate to put it bluntly, but it's called brainwashing. One of the things that the second book, The Invisible World and Other Obvious Things, talks about is the underlying things that are responsible for the things that we perceive. The book gets relatively heavily into quantum physics and particle physics, not from a mathematics standpoint, but from a way that's easy to understand. I mean, I'm not trying to be complex, but you will notice that in some of the books I do use somewhat complex language, because one of the disadvantages of the English language is that to really say accurately what you want to say, you've got to use a lot of words. If you use too few words, you end up leaving the listener with too heavy a burden of interpreting what's being said. On the other hand, if you use too many words, then the listener can get lost in the words. So it's really a vicarious balance, trying to relay a message, an information or knowledge in a way that it will be useful because of that propensity of man to be dependent upon language. But you'll find the most powerful form of knowing or knowingness does not manifest as information. It manifests as feeling, which I find very interesting, because one of the things that we were constantly taught when I was coming up in Pentecostalism, which, the way we practiced it, we were, about, one prayer away from being Baptist. We weren't like the Holy Rollers or, the guys that foamed at the mouth or rolled all over the floor or anything like that. Not that I have anything against that. If that's your stick, more power to you. But the church that I was involved with and the community I was involved with was a teaching community. There actually was very little actual preaching that went on. It was a lot of exposition, a lot of exegesis, a lot of comparison, line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little, as the scripture goes. So we were already in a place where we were carefully considering information, but the question is, what information were we considering, and what was the source of that information? So we were taught in that paradigm that you should, as much as possible, not rely upon your feelings as an indicator of where you are in your progression, in your walk, or in your relationship with God, as we called it, or with Jesus. We were taught that emotion was secondary. Now, there's no bigger lie than a half-truth, because certainly you don't want to go around depending on your emotions as any form of guidance. The point I'm trying to make is that when you really receive information, you'll find that there's a very paradoxical sensation that occurs. When it really gets into your heart, there are many times when you can't articulate it with words. You can't repeat what you know, but you feel that you know it. You got the feel of it. Well, that's the real information. That's the real knowledge. And that's one of the things that's difficult to grasp about this walk, because we're inundated with information in this age. We've got television, we've got radio, we've got the internet, we've got computers, we've got newspapers. Everywhere and from every direction you're bombarded with information. And you know, this culture, even this world, I would say at this point, is top heavy. Our heads are overworked. We hear so much and we assimilate so much information. What has not been worked, what we have not been taught to work or to negotiate or to develop, is our emotions. And when you start talking about emotions, you're really talking about the tip of the iceberg of your subconscious being, or what I call the collective subconscious. Alright, so one of the things we talk about in this book is how to begin to approach that area of true learning. And we talk about, you know, to a great extent, the actual scientific physics behind those dynamics. Now, the third book is a book called Terra, Return of the Divine Feminine. Now, if either of the first two books would upset anyone, I would presume this third one would upset the most people, because what it does is it looks at the patriarchal paradigm. I love that word paradigm. I probably use it 500 times. It's a worldview, a way of looking at life. What's interesting about the patriarchal paradigm in our religion and our society, meaning that it is the father figure, the male that is the preeminent or the dominant one, is that this paradigm was given to us by the Sumerian culture. The true heritage of our planet, if you will, is matriarchal in nature. The great goddess was not so much worshipped, but esteemed and honored. In point of fact, I'm going to go so far as to say that the concept of worship is a very, very destructive concept, and it was given to us to create an air of control by a very few that I call the dark oligarchy. And I'll go into detail about who and what that dark oligarchy is as we progress through the programs. But what we've done by effectively shutting out the divine feminine is that we've cut off half of our humanity, half of our humanness. And to be more pointed, we've cut ourselves off from half of our true consciousness. You know, many of you may be familiar with an author by the name of Michael Cesarian, and there's not a single time that I've heard him speak where he hasn't mentioned the importance of the idea of consciousness in the equation. Because I don't care what kind of rituals you do, I don't care where you're coming, how advanced you feel you are spiritually, or what idealism you're following. The key is to get in touch with the consciousness factor. The consciousness factor. Now, what does that mean? Well, you know, the philosophers said, I think, therefore I am, and extrapolating, you might say, well, I think, therefore I am conscious, or I think, therefore I exist. But where does this consciousness come from? What is it exactly? Where does it live? That's one of the things that the book Terra, Return of the Divine Feminine, gets into. But it more specifically gets into what steps we need to take to redirect our perception so that it will become an asset rather than a hindrance. And when we take this step, when we take that step of re-educating our perception, so to speak, you find that you divorce yourself from the need to overcome the programming, or to overcome this or that, or to bridge this gap, or to get better. Because what starts happening is you start getting in touch with the reality and the essence of the consciousness, which is so important to who you are. And that connectedness, that sense of connectedness, allows you then to direct yourself. and to follow a path that not only works for you, but likely will not work for anyone else. Again, that's part of the paradox of consciousness and of individuality. And we get into something called the subjectivity experiment. The subjectivity experiment. And that is the experiment of source to experience as a single unified entity, to experience subjectivity. Notice, not disconnectedness, but subjectivity. And this great consciousness that is source has been broken up in all these little pieces for the sake of that experiment, if you will, or that game. It's really quite a large ritual that source is having, source playing with itself. We also get into some very, very interesting elements of sacred geometry in the third book. And we get into some very interesting information about how Mother Earth herself, being a sentient being, she's a personality, she can help us. I mean, we're made of the same stuff she is. So we get into great depth in all of these things. Now, what I should explain is that these three books altogether are part of a series or a trilogy that I'm calling the Aquarian Age Trilogy. All right? This three-set book is, this three-book set, I should say, is to equip us to be architects of the Aquarian Age. These three books together are designed to help us break away from the mold and answer our own questions about what's going to happen in 2012. So I encourage you to visit the website and to take a look at the books. There's a chapter preview. You can look at the books. But I also encourage you very much to take a look at the links in the reference section of the webpage. Now, one of the things I did intentionally was I put all of the reference materials for all of the books on the website, so that even if you don't buy the books, there's some very good information that you can get by visiting the website. Of course, there are things in the book, in all three books, that you won't get on the website, but it'll get you going. So if you're in a place where you just can't afford to buy the books, and I know that sounds silly, but there's a strange economy going on there, then you're not out in the cold, because there's a lot of very, very good information on the website. I just want to remind everyone that you're listening to the Progressions of Consciousness Internet radio broadcast on the CLN radio network. The website for CLN is www.clnradio.com. I'm Keith Henry, your host, and this is the first Progressions of Consciousness radio program. I got to tell you, I'm very, very, very excited about this. Now, I also want to talk a little bit about the show and what we'll be doing. The show is going to be essentially geared towards fostering an Aquarian mentality. As I said, the Mayan calendar ends in 2012, but the Aquarian age doesn't start until about 2040 or 2050. So we have this huge window of time. What's going to happen in that window of time? Before I answer that, I might also add, why is it that the Mayan calendar ended so abruptly? Well, one of the things that you have to realize is that the vast majority of the understanding we have of the Mayan calendar comes from a couple of documents that were saved before our buddies, the Roman Catholic Church, destroyed the vast majority of the Mayans' writings, including all of their science and math. So it's my contention that the whole 2012 thing is simply where the Mayans stopped, And it's not necessarily that they wanted to stop there, but we'll never know, will we? Because that information from the Mayans is lost. But fortunately for us and for the world, the Mayans are not the creators of this information. They were simply entrusted with preserving the information for posterity. And once our buddies, those guys in Rome, once they got their hands on that information, I'm not even necessarily convinced that all of it was destroyed. I think that maybe some of it is just being, archived, and that there are very few eyes that are allowed to see it. And I'm not going to be dogmatic about that because I don't know. But that is the nature of the beast. So we're going to be talking about how to prepare for the Aquarian age. The website for this program, you can get to it from visiting my homepage, www.don'treadthisbook.net, and then you'll see in the left column where it says book information, there's a link that says our internet radio broadcast webpage. Click on that, and that's going to basically be everything you need to interface with me with regard to the program. I'll be posting links up there for the various programs, and also I'll have on the site the topic of discussion for that program. And the topic of discussion for this program is setting the stage for the Aquarian age. Fear, 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 fear. That's the weapon. That's what's being used against us to keep us from looking further than what feels comfortable to us. And I don't need to tell any of you this, but if you spend your life doing only what is comfortable in this current world system, you'll end up in the poorhouse, you'll end up hungry, you'll end up dead. Because what you're being fed, what you're being given, has no real nutritional value. It's designed to control you. So what we're going to be looking at is how to transcend that. What we have to do as individuals is begin to wake up, and everybody's aware pretty much of this great awakening that's occurring in the world. We're calling it, the awakening consciousness, or whatever you want to call it. But this awakening, the dynamic of this awakening is very, very different than what you might think. In one way of looking at it, people are saying, well, if enough people start to gain a certain level of consciousness, then the world will transcend its current estate and go on to a greater realm, a greater place. And I would be the last one to disagree with that. But it doesn't start on a group basis. It starts on an individual basis. One of the very important elements of energy that are coming in with the Aquarian age is the energy or the paradigm of the individual constituent of the whole. In the Pisces age, over the last 26,000 years, we've been a society and a world of hierarchy. And let me just step back and talk about what an age is. In astrology, the Mayans had several calendars, and I'll get into this information later. I don't want to spend too much time on it today, so I'm just going to be very brief with it. One of the elements of the Mayan calendar was a 26,000-year cycle, and this 26,000-year cycle coincides with a particular relationship that our planet and our solar system has with one of the 12 houses of the zodiac. Well, the last 26,000-year cycle, the current, I should say, 26,000-year cycle is ending in, guess when? December 2012, or 2040, or thereabout. And the next cycle that's coming into place, the next 26,000-year cycle, is the Aquarian cycle. So the Aquarian cycle brings with it the air of personal responsibility, personal growth, yet not to the neglect or the ignorance of the whole or the one. And this is, to a great degree, what has been stolen from us through this programming, among other things, is the inability to reconcile in any way the idea of being both individual and one, part of the one, or the collective. The prevailing sentiment has been that you have to either consider yourself an individual, or you have to consider yourself one with all, and that these two ideals were mutually exclusive. Well, they're not at all. But the reason we look at it that way is because of the way we've been programmed and the very, very subtle tools of propaganda and conditioning that have been used to really cause us to think that way, to not be able to mentally reconcile those two concepts. And I've said this in various interviews that I've had, hooray for the New Age movement, and, energy workers and light workers and people that know about the chakras and the different bodies and the dimensions. But one of the things that we've neglected in the mix of these chakras and dimensions and subtle bodies is that the physical body is itself a subtle body. And we've been conditioned to think that it is a physical, material thing. Let me rephrase that. We've been conditioned to think that our perception of that physical material, or of that mass, is the primary manifestation of our being. Now, when I say primary, I mean the one that is the most relevant to who we are as humans. As such, it was easy to introduce the concept that we had to become spiritual because we had fallen away from spirituality, and that we're too concerned with the flesh or the body or the physical things. But what we've not been given privy to is that the physical body, these things that we call physical, are indeed as much spiritual and subtle as the other 6 commonly known subtle bodies. And I explore that in depth in the 2nd and 3rd books. And we're going to get to it in this program. And eventually we're going to hit something that I call the progression of consciousness states model. And what this model does is it describes from what I call a more accurate viewpoint who we are as beings in relation to the greater whole, in relation to each other, and in relation to Source. Now, if you go to the website www.don'treadthisbook.net, in the left column, under the book information column, you'll find a link to the progression of consciousness chart. I would encourage everyone to take a look at that chart and to study it. If you have questions, please feel free to send them in. You'll find on the website also, don'treadthisbook.net, you'll find in the left column a link for comments. And it's a web form. You'll just click on that link, you'll enter your information and your comments, and I'll get those comments. And if you have questions, I will answer them in the following program. Now, what my eventual goal is to have a program that is nothing but question and answer. But I don't want to leave you hanging if you have some important questions that I haven't answered during the course of the program that are important to your understanding. Also, I will post some of those questions on the website. There's a view comment section where if I find that it's a very relevant question, I'll post that so that others can also see it. So your input would be greatly appreciated. So in looking at this chart, the chart identifies 4 discrete states of consciousness, I'm calling them. And remember, folks, this is a model. It's a model. It is not a standard. It is not, absolute truth from the great God on high. It is my absolute truth at this time, but it's only a more accurate version of a truth that I've lived by conscientiously my whole life. So hopefully what this chart will do for you is it will help you to form your own ideals and come up with your own variations or extrapolations of what I've come up with. But I feel there are some very profound and important elements of this model that apply to everyone. So once again, I would encourage you to take a look at that chart, and just take a look at the whole website and get what you can from it. Because in the upcoming programs, we'll be talking in detail about a lot of that information. Okay, now I want to spend just a few minutes talking about Mother Earth. This is going to be kind of a strange thing for some people because they're used to thinking about the planet as an inanimate thing. But I believe that the planet is a living, conscious, and sentient being. And that at this very, very important time in history, that we could use as much help as we can get. And some of you are familiar with what scientists have uncovered with regard to our connectedness to the planet Earth. What they have found out is that there's a basic vibration, an energetic vibration, or a frequency that we share with the planet, and that in effect that frequency is picked up by our antenna and connects us to the planet and us to each other. So this dynamic to me is very similar on a wider scale to what scientists have discovered and are calling the unified field. And you know, in my opinion, this idea of a unified field along the lines of physics is, you know, the physics theoretical uncovering, if you will, of consciousness, the seed of consciousness. That unified field is that which joins us and binds us all together. So within that context, realize that we actually have a means of consciously connecting with Terra, our Mother Earth, and gaining insight, information, inspiration, and enablement to do a lot of different things. So we'll be talking about this in more detail as the program progresses as well. All right, now in the first chapter of the third book of the Architects of the Aquarian Age trilogy, I talk about the word apocalypse. Now, when most people hear that word, they think about, again, destruction and doom and gloom. But the actual word means literally an uncovering. It means a revelation. And a very important component of that uncovering and revelation, which is occurring at this time in history, is what you might call a consciousness of each other as individuals and as the one. But one of the things that I see as a result of this is a very profound cleansing that is going on, and Mother Earth is going through it, which explains the Earth changes. We as human beings are going through it, which explains, you know, all of the new mental diseases that have seemed to crop up out of nowhere. But the old paradigm just isn't working anymore. Now, what is being uncovered? What is being revealed? As a matter of fact, for you Bible enthusiasts, the last book of the Bible, Revelations, is based on that word apocalypse. What is being uncovered? What are we being shown? What is being revealed? Well, what's being revealed is the truth of what's happening to us, the truth of where we are and where we're going. And that is, there are very, very profound implications based on that, because among other things, it says that where we have been is not where we necessarily want to be. And one of the places this manifests is, and once again we'll get into much greater depth and detail as the programs go on, one of the areas that manifests is with this patriarchal religion that we have, where we worship God the Father. Now, that's Christian religion, but most monotheistic religions are patriarchal in nature, most if not all of them. Now, we have to understand, what is monotheistic? Well, monotheism is the idea that there is only one God rather than many, and the opposite viewpoint to monotheism is paganism. But the thing you have to understand about paganism is these people weren't idiots. They didn't think that a tree was God, or that a bird was God, or that this or that thing was God. What they saw was that there were certain elements with which they interacted on a daily basis, and they were giving honor to that discrete element, and they worshipped it as God, not the God. There's not a single pagan that thinks that there's, multiple the gods. They all believe that there's one source, but that there are manifestations of that one source that are so profound that it behooves us and is indeed fitting that we acknowledge that element with worship and honor. And that's really what paganism is all about. Well, the monotheistic religions said, well, no, there's only one God, and it's God the Father, and if you don't worship him, he's going to send you to hell. So, going right along with the monotheistic viewpoint of religion was hell. The pagans, on the other hand, they had a hell too, thanks to the Greeks. They had their underworld. But the pagan religions, the pagan esoteric thought, tended to be either on the feminine side or toward the balance of masculine and feminine, so that you had a masculine god figure, but you also had a masculine goddess figure that were equals, or that were together. What monotheism has done is completely suppressed the feminine, or the divine feminine, which is the namesake of the third book, and replaced it with the Father God, or the divine masculine. And if you've heard any of Michael Tsarian's talks, you probably have a good idea of the implications of that, and where it's taking us as a race. And again, I will be getting into that in more detail as we go along. Once again, I want to remind everyone, you're listening to the Progressions of Consciousness Internet Radio program. I'm Keith Henry, and we are here compliments of the CLN Radio Network. That's www.clnradio.com. All right. I touched upon this briefly a few minutes ago, but by way of introduction, I also want to talk about the nature of physical reality and what it's all about. I'm really such an enthusiast when it comes to particle physics. My first job was in a subatomic particle detection facility. I worked at the University of Pennsylvania. I was working on the hardware that went into the particle detector at Brookhaven National Labs. Now, that particle detector is very similar to the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland, but just a very much smaller version of it, and they were doing slightly different experiments, but the principle is the same. Well, one of the things that experiments that have been done with this type of equipment, and the type of equipment in CERN, Switzerland, is that they've started to get, again, what I call a more accurate view of particle physics and what the stuff of material is actually made of. What many people may be surprised to discover is that physical matter comprises overwhelmingly more space than it does matter. Something like 99.9999999, I could go on, percent of physical matter is space. So how is it that objects feel and seem heavy to you? Well, that's part of the mystery that quantum physics and particle physics and theoretical physics is unraveling for us. And this is one of the reasons why I've come to the conclusion that I have as far as the nature of the physical body being actually spirit and a subtle body. And if you will take a look at my progression of consciousness chart, you'll get a little more insight into what I'm talking about there and where I'm going with it. So the bottom line is that we have, you might call it a responsibility to ourselves and to our future to take that responsibility and make it our own and make our future become what we want it to become, not what others want for us. And the key is, the very, very important key is that the most important governing dynamic behind this is that the change that we want to see happens on an individual basis, not a group basis. Once again, the Aquarian energy is coming in. The ruling hierarchy, that age is done with. It's now the age of the individual enlightenment, individual perception, individual responsibility, individual awareness and self-awareness beyond anything else, because once again we've allowed our worlds to literally fall apart because we've not learned nor been taught how to deal with our subconscious. And I go into great depth about that in the last two books. So we're just about out of time here. I want to thank you for joining me today, and once again I encourage you to visit the website www.don'treadthisbook.net and to browse around the site. If you have any questions, feel free to visit the comments form and send me a comment. Once again, it is you individually that is responsible as one of many architects of the Aquarian age. So you're going to need to step out of your program paradigm in order to learn how to do that. It's up to you, and it's up to me, and it's right around the corner. See you next time.